I'm live. Hello, ladies and gents. Lovely day, end of the week. On influence you today, young teenagers, mature teenagers, young adults, and mature adults, OAPs. You may be a little bit bored where your life's heading at the moment. You want to change direction. We all need a bit of hope, don't we? We all need a bit of hope, and we need to grasp on something to keep methodical of how we look at the world, the universe. Keep our minds occupied. It's very important, isn't it? We keep our minds occupied. Doing something therapeutic, doing something methodical. Now, here's an idea. Let's pick up some academics. Let's explore our academic integrity. Let's look at the introduction of this unit. Economic Power, Transoceanic Empires by Robin McKay. In this unit, we will explore how empires work from an economic perspective. The topic is, of course, enormous, and in one unit, we can only touch on some elements, but we will try to do so in a way that will prepare you to ask economic based questions elsewhere. After completing this unit, you should be able to identify the economic dimensions of other imperial questions that we explore. Economic gain is sometimes presented as the main aim of imperialism, as we have seen in Block 2. Hopes of immense wealth were one motivating factor for the early Spanish and Portuguese navigators, or the conquistadors in Central America, and for the states that sponsored them. And this continued to be the case as empires become more complex. For individuals, companies, and states, potential profits of empire remained a significant factor. The block's question, how do empires work, can therefore be rephrased in terms of questions about gain. How were profits made from empire? Who made them? Inevitably linked to this are also questions about barriers and costs. What risks had to be taken? What hurdles overcome? And, of course, what price was paid, both in terms of people but also the environment. Such questions set a basic framework for understanding the economics of empire, a framework that may seem callous, but helps analyse what happened from an economic perspective rather than, for instance, focus on power, culture, or experience. The questions above um, not sure where I am. Hmm. Section 2 explores, for example, early modern period, looking at each case and how profits were made and price paid. Section 3 will place an important shift on the practice that took place in late 18th and early 19th centuries. The shift of mercantilism to free trade. Section 4 will parallel Section 2 by looking at a number of examples, but for the 19th and early 20th century, Section 5 will return to the big questions about the consequences and legacies of empire. Who benefited from empire and who bore the cost? Throughout this unit, attempts will be made to use and analyse the quantitative data available, even when it is scarce, as is the case before the 19th century, when more systematic collection of statistics began. As with other primary sources, it is important to consider why such data was created and how this shapes what has been left for us. We will also look at primary texts that can give us some insight in how contemporaries saw economic issues. Profiting from empire in the early modern world. In the next section, we will consider three case studies, all related to empire between the 16th and 19th centuries. The first looks at extracting gold and silver from the Inca Empire in the Andes. The second at sugar production in the Caribbean, and the third explores how the East India Company managed Bengal. There are two subsections for each case study. In each case, we will focus on questions about profits, costs, and risks raised in the introductions. The economics of plunder, the conquest of Inca Empire. Unit 5 focused on the Spanish conquest of Mexico, but also briefly mentioned the subsequent conquest of the Inca Empire by Francisco Pizarro. Pizarro won an early success by capturing the Inca Emperor, the Atahualpa, on their first encounter at the northern town of Cajamarca in November 1532. Yet, as in Mexico, the conquest of the empire took much longer. The Inca Empire stretched from the present day Ecuador to the central Chile, and it was many years before it was entirely conquered. The following is a short extract from an account left by Diego de Castro, Tito Cusi Yupanqui, 1530 to 1571, a grandson of one of the last Inca emperors, Huayni Capac, and the son of Manco Inca, who Pizarro had crowned as a puppet ruler, and who later turned against the Spanish. Tito Cusi inherited control of the Vilcabamba, a post-Inca state in the eastern Andes that evaded Spanish control until the 1570s. Tito Cusi's account covers the conquest of Peru. The extract is of an exchange between Manco Inca and Hernando Pizarro, the brother of Francisco. The term Viracocha refers to the creator god in Inca mythology. The first conquistadors were at times mistaken for his emissaries. If we look at source 9.1, he had poorly requited my good intentions and my benevolence, without any provocation on my part. These soldiers have tormented and hurt by putting these iron fetters on me, as though I was their llama, which means sheep. Canero, it seems to me that this harassment is motivated by greed more than heroism. Obviously, I've been held prisoner more because of insatiable greed than because of any jurisdiction that they might rightfully claim over me, as we have seen for ourselves and can testify. You Spaniards defeated me not by the force of arms, but through pretty words. Had you not pretended to be sons of emissaries of Viracocha, and we had not given any credit to the ingratian devices that have brought to bear on me, I should like to know how you would fared when entering our country, but because I conducted myself in a way that I've done toward you, you treat me in this manner. Some noble recompense that you are giving me. Here for all the good things I have done for you. I don't even know how much gold and silver I paid your soldiers there in order to save myself from their harassment. When their governor heard my father answer, he was very pleased by it and commanded the Spaniards to receive the treasure, happy about the treasure that my father had given them. The soldiers responded to the governor with great joyfulness. Tito Cusi's accounts need to be read with care. It was dedicated to a Quechua-speaking Spanish missionary and conforms to Spanish conventions in its form and style. Nevertheless, the basic message of this extract is likely to have run true to many Inca people and perhaps many others conquered by European imperialists. The prime motivation of the conquerors was loot. In any account of the defeat of the Incas, precious metals must play an important role. Atahualpa recognized in Pizarro's obsession that often my ransom of a room full of gold and double the amount of silver. As the Spaniards found out across the Inca Empire, it was stories of treasure that guided where they went. To understand why, it is useful to consider the Spanish perspective. Treasure played an important role in Pizarro's expedition. The conquest of Americas was risk, and high rewards needed to be offered to the conquistadors who accompanied him. Pizarro also needed to pay him his backers, both in Panama and in Spain. Before setting off on his third and successful expedition to Peru, he travelled to Spain to win royal financial support, and more importantly, a royal contract to establish a Spanish colony in the Andes. A colony that would be expected to pay the Quanto Real, the royal fifth, a tax levy on all precious metals. Nor did the demand for gold end with the conquest. Pizarro kept needing to lure men south to establish Spanish rule over the immense Inca territories. Rewards were therefore required, but the very distance of the Inca Empire from Spain was an immense barrier. Everything exported from the Inca heartlands in the high Andes had been transported down to the coast, shipped to Panama, hauled across the isthmus, and then transported across the Atlantic to Cadiz. Everything brought from Spain had to follow the reverse route. Gold and silver were ideal in respect, and their apparent abundance in the Inca Empire was vital to the success of the enterprise. Once Atahualpa's ransom was paid 8 months after his capture, the gold and silver were immediately smelted down so that Pizarro's co-leaders and the common soldiers could receive their share to take back to Spain if they wished. You will recall from Unit 5 the letter by the conquistados Melchor Verdugo, which revealed how focused he remained on using his newfound wealth to enhance his status back home. The division of Inca wealth remained a source of conflict until the 1570s and the legend of El Dorado, a golden empire hidden in the jungles of South America that would revival that of the Aztecs or the Incas, motivated adventures for centuries. The mines of Potosi, yet plundered gold and silver are bound to run out. What turned conquest of Peru into a lasting empire were new sources of precious metals. From the beginning, Pizarro and his men were interested in where gold was mined, but it was silver that eventually proved to be like the key find. As the conquistadors traveled towards the Inca capital of Cuzco, they learned of the rich silver mines further south. The most famous was a mountain named Cerro Rico, the rich mountain above the town of Potosi, sitting at an altitude of 4,000 meters in what is now the Bolivian Andes. Its value was immediately obvious. A contemporary chronicler noted that between 1548 and 1551, income from Andean silver mines, including Potosi, yielded more than the Spaniards got from Atahualpa, and more was found in the city of Cuzco when it was first occupied. At first, silver was found near the surface, and the mines were largely worked by local miners. By the late 1550s, however, the easiest veins were depleted and production stagnated. Yet, silver from the Americas was increasingly important to Philip II of Spain, embroiled in European wars, particularly following the revolt of the Netherlands in 1560s. Raising production was therefore one of the main priorities for the new Viceroy of Peru. Francisco de Toledo set in 1569 to establish better control of Spain Andean possessions. De Toledo reorganized government and society to ensure greater control from Madrid in what has been described as a conquest after the conquest. De Toledo found solutions to both issues confronting the silver mines, a better means of extracting silver from ore, and a better supply of labour. A new procedure for extracting silver had recently been developed. If liquid mercury quicksilver is mixed with crushed silver bearing ore, it attracts the silver, creating silver mercury amalgam, from which the mercury can be separated by heating. Mercury had recently been found in Huancavelica in central Peru. De Toledo arranged for a demonstration of a new method and organised the mining of mercury and its transport to Potosi. In terms of labour, at first Plans were made to use enslaved people, including from Africa. But appalling death rates soon persuaded the Spanish that a better answer lay in exploiting the people of the high Andes. De Toledo revised the Inca tribute system for raising labor for public work such as road building. The, the Mita for this purpose, adult males, is a wide area around Potosi, were required to work every 17th year in the mines. This created a workforce for the Spanish business who become to the mines, dominate the mines. Which effected of these measures was a triple silver production in the city from 63,000 kilograms in 1565 to 194,000 kilograms in 1592. Potosi silver became a mainstay of the Spanish Empire. By the end of the 17th century, silver accounted for 80 to 90% of Spanish American exports to Europe. Potosi itself became the largest city in the Americas with 160,000 inhabitants. Together with other mines in the Spanish American Empire, its mines accounted for some 80% of global silver production between 1530 and 1800. As we will see, silver became the essential commodity in intercontinental trade. For the people of Peru and Bolivia, however, the mining of mercury and silver were continuing disasters. Mercury is highly poisonous, and its mining and transport and the processing of silver in Potosi led to high death rates and presumably widespread illness. Both physical and mental. Population in the Mita areas, already badly affected by European diseases, continued to decline as peasants fled to escape the Mita system. The ecological consequences were also severe. Environmental historian John Richards argues that it is likely that mercury pollution from the silver mines of Mexico and Peru constituted the largest source of industrial pollution into the entire early modern world. The legacy of mining in the early modern era still shapes the city today. De Souza Santos of Ayamamoto. The rewards of this exploitation were reaped in the first instance by conquistadors who accompanied Pizarro or followed soon after, although we should note that the high death rate among them, high risk accompanied the prospect of enormous wealth. Longer term profits were made by silver mining companies, by merchants who brought the silver to Europe, and, not least, by the Spanish crown, which profited from the tax on mining and its monopoly on the sale of mercury. Slave and sugar in the British Caribbean. Unit 6, we have read about the sugar revolution, which saw the sugar supplement of other plantation crops as a main export from the Caribbean. It shows us how the export from Americans developed almost until the French Revolution, since sugar was an intercontinental trade. Data on imports was collected for customs purposes, although the values were often official ones relevant for duties rather than market values. One element in the sugar revolution was the shift in the workforce from indentured servants to enslaved people. If we look at the table 9.2 to 9.3, give figures for the enslaved and white population of British Island. Barbados was the first English colony, followed next by the Leeward Islands and later Jamaica. No further colonies were added until the late 18th century, when some of the Vineyard Island and Trinidad were acquired from the French in 1763 after the 7 Years' War. Compare tables 9.2 and 9.3. What do you notice about trends in the size of enslaved population and the white population, and what is the cumulative impact? Which colony experienced the greatest change? You'll recall from Unit 6 that Barbados was the first colony to switch to sugar production and that others followed soon after. This shift was linked to a huge increase in the enslaved population. Sugar production was very labour intensive, both in terms of planting and harvesting the crops, and processing the sugar cane into sugar. As a result, large numbers of enslaved people were brought to the Caribbean, including many thousands to the British colonies as shown in Table 9.4. Yet high death rates and low birth rates meant that the population did not replace itself. The 341,000 enslaved people in the British island in 1760, as shown in Table Number 2, were more than double the number 60 years earlier. But David Eltis estimates that 971,000 Africans were brought to the British Americas, the vast majority of the Caribbean colonies between 1700 and 1760. Meanwhile, the white population barely changed despite considerable immigration. Historian Trevor Bernard estimates that between 100,000 and 125,000 Europeans arrived in Jamaica between 1655 and 1766. Yet there were just under 13,000 white people on the island at the end of the period. He describes the island as a failed settler society with a high death rate and few births. As a result, the white population of the British Caribbean always feared slave rebellions, and the colonial assemblies passed a series of deficiency laws to ensure the plantations had a minimum number of white people to maintain militias, hence to the frequent census of population, which had to be used in tables 9.2 and 9.3. If we explore how profitable sugar plantations were, as long as 1978 John Ward used estate accounts to calculate the rate of profit, the ratio of income receipts minus expenditure to the capital stock in the enterprise. He estimated the latter based on the main capital owned by plantation. The number of enslaved people. His results are shown in Table 9.5. Note that the second column indicates whether or not Britain and its colonies were at war between the specified dates. Ward's samples are small and he spends much of his article discussing both how representative they are and the methods he used to calculate and compare profitability. One bias he notes is that almost all the accounts were for plantations where the owner was an absentee resident in the UK, and this indeed helps explain why detailed records were kept. This, however, true for a significant percentage of estate owners. His figures have been largely confirmed by more recent and detailed work on individual plantations and are still widely used. Plantations then were profitable and at times extremely so. Ward suggests an annual average of about 10%, slightly above the extremely profitable slave trade. But there were also risks. This table highlights warfare, which was common in the 18th century and might mean on trade, raids, and even invasion. The American War of Independence was particularly tough since the control of the sea routes was temporarily lost. Jamaica was hit by a disastrous earthquake in 1692, and hurricanes are common in the Caribbean. Longer term risks include crop diseases and soil exhaustion due to over exploitation. High profits were made in the newer colonies because their soils were fresh. Yet studies of the plantations have also emphasised their resilience. War could bring benefits. In the final period of Table 9.5, revolution ended exports for the French colony of Saint Dominique, and as a result, prices in the British trade island rose. Justin Roberts' study of the absent island estate in Barbados shows the managers finding solutions to problems such as deforestation, labour, scarcity, and hurricanes. If there were bad years, profits soon rebounded. This profitability is confirmed by another source, inventories of wealth at death. Inventories also need to be used with care. They did not include land, which was, of course, a major part of landowners' wealth, nor did they list debts. Bernard, who has studied them most extensively, devotes considerable attention to these concerns. As with the estate accounts, we need to regard his findings as a best estimate. Working from a sample of 272 inventories of Jamaicans who died in 1774 to 75, Bernard calculates the average wealth at death of his example of 3,188 and extrapolates from this average wealth of white men on the island in 1774, including land, as 4,403, 463,500 in 2021 prices. He emphasised that Jamaica was a very unequal society, with most land and wealth concentrated in the hands of a small elite of large planters and merchants. But with so few people on the island, their average wealth was many times of the inhabitants of Britain or in the North America colonies, with just 16.3% of the total population of British North America and 2.4% of white population. The British West Indies made up 32.2% of the total of wealth of the British colonies. This wealth was based on slavery, using a method called total factor productivity that calculates the value of different inputs. Ahmed Reid reckons that slave labour, or as opposed to land and capital, and always between 54 to 64% of the inputs into Jamaica plantations between 1784 and 1805. Bernard describes a society in which a small number of rich planters lorded over huge numbers of enslaved people. These men and occasional women took advantage of Jamaica's natural advantages in the production of high-value commodity export to establish a highly profitable system of slave management in which successfully manipulated complex agro-industrial technology, a complicated, integrated trade network, and most importantly, a brutal method of labour exploitation that ruthlessly used and discarded overworked, badly fed and abused slaves of African descent, Eddie. If we turn to the questions which we have ended the discussion of silver mining, we can see straightforward answers to many of our questions. The wealth of the West Indies derived from sugar and the work of enslaved people. The sugar we are talking about is here. The main beneficiaries were planters and slave and sugar trades. Got 5 more minutes, some of you. The main cost of the system were borne by enslaved Africans is also obvious, like Latin America silver mining. The economics of slavery meant that slave owners saw little advantage into caring for their labour force, even if over time they came to take steps to protect their land from exhaustion. Such were the profits of slavery. The white people were prepared to risk the morality for a chance to make fortunes. The British takeover of Bengal. As we recall from YouTube, the Battle of Paisley in 1757 has been seen as a key turning point in the foundation of the British Empire in India. As is often the case with iconic dates, it was in fact one event in turbulent period that only really come to an end in 1765, when a deal was struck between the much weakened Mughal Empire, Shah Alam II, and the East Indian Company, Governor of Bengal, Robert Clive. The Shah remained the titular ruler of Bengal, receiving an allowance from the EIC, which took over the government of Bengal, including the Diwani, the right to collect taxes. The outcome was not unusual as it sounds. Tax farming, subcontracting the process of tax collection to private individuals or corporations was common both in India and Europe at the time. But this outcome gave the EIC control of state India's richest province. Very soon, however, alarm were expressed about the consequence of these events. This was particularly the case when the conquest was followed by famine, partly as a result of a failure of the monsoon, which, although estimates vary, may have resulted in the deaths of up to 15 to 20% of the province's total population of 20 million. We can consider the views of the following two writers on the problems faced by Bengal. How do they compare? Firstly, here are the views of a former officer of the EIC, Andrew Doe, who went on to become leading writer on Indian history. Bengal, from the mildness of its climate, the fertility of its soil, and the natural industry of the Hindus, was always remarkable for its commerce. The easy communication by water from place to place facilitated a mercantile intercourse among the inhabitants, a people from an unavoidable prejudice of religion, abstemious were averse to luxury themselves, and the wants of nature were supplied almost spontaneously by the soil and climate. The balance of trade, therefore, was against all nations in favour of Bengal, and it was a sink where gold and silver disappeared without the last prospect of return. We appeal to the testimony of those who marched through Bengal after the death of Siraj ul Dowlah. At that time, it was one of the richest, most populous, and best cultivated kingdoms in the world. The great men and merchants were wallowing in wealth and luxury, and inferior tenants and the manufacturers were blessed with plenty, content, and safe. But a cloud which has since obscured the sunshine was near. The civil wars to which a violent desire of creating nabobs gave rise were attended with tragical events. The country was depopulated by every species of public distresses. In the space of 6 years, half the great cities of an opulent kingdom were rendered desolate. The most fertile fields in the world lay waste. The 5 millions of harmless and industrious people were either expelled or destroyed.